Hello everybody, today we're going to analyze Scrat from Ice Age and correct the god-awful physics engine they used in the game Ice Age 5 Skyrim. Tundra environments can be hard to world build so that they're cool. Look at that. That's not interesting. That's moss. So today let's go over what tundras are, where they form, the features that make them unique, and do a little bit of world building with Arctic Minotaurs. Get excited! I'm excited. Are you excited? Whoa, not that excited. Put your pants back on.
Please guys, the YouTube CEO has me trapped in her basement making videos for her, and every time somebody clicks off without subscribing, they shock me with a Michael Reeves device, so I need your help to... join the Discords and the Minecraft server, but...
Tundras are the mushy, gushy, frozen, frosty biomes at the North and South Poles, where they receive long and extreme winters and short, mild summers. There's 3 descriptive categories of tundra that are important to cover here: Plains Tundra, Alpine Tundra, and Polar Deserts. All 3 are characterized by dry conditions, extremely cold temperatures, and the inability for large plants to grow. Plains tundras are the regular snowscapes that we usually think about as tundras. In the summer, a plains tundra will look like rolling hills of low shrubs and grass, large rockscapes, and marsh and swampland. The placement of plains tundra on a global scaled map is rather straightforward. On Earth, tundra makes up a band along the Arctic coast of the Northern Hemisphere. If you start in southern Canada and make your way north, you'll first pass through a forest of mixed evergreens and hardwood deciduous trees. Then you'll go through a massive band of all evergreen taiga forest. Then at either 60 or 66 degrees north, the pine forests will become less dense, more fragmented, and smaller sized until you're totally in a tundra plain. Up here, plains tundras are characterized by its permafrost, where the ground itself is frozen solid. The summer sun might melt the surface so a foot or two at the top isn't frozen, but beneath that stays rock hard. Large plants can't sink their roots into this stuff, so you only get stuff like mosses, grass, small shrubs, flowers, anything with shallow roots that can go dormant during a long winter. There's not much plant matter up here, but some animals like reindeer can travel and graze off of these shrubs. Otherwise, the foxes, wolves, and bears here will have to hunt for small prey, feed off of large migratory bird populations, or hunt for fish in the rivers and ocean nearby. A traveler in the summer tundra may find it to be a surprisingly alien place. If you're here in the summer, it might be pretty foggy. Mostly on the ground, it'll be stretches of soggy land of melted permafrost and mosses. But you also get ponds, lakes, rivers, these things called pingos, which are like sudden pimple hills with small ponds inside of them. Also patterned grounds, mosaics of marshy ridges and ponds that look man-made, kettles, glacier-formed pockets of round ponds that create a landscape of dimpled circular lakes, and pulsas, mounds of decayed organic material. Most of these features are lowland ponds and swampy terrain, but the tundra also consists of rolling hills, rockscapey landscapes, plateaus, gullies, cliffs, and mountains. It's weird to hear that plains tundras are dry places because, as you can see, the environment here is quite waterlogged. I've read that a lot of summer tundra soil is like stepping on a big mossy sponge. This water gives way to there being so many goddamn bugs. It's like a Bethesda game. My friend who wants to settle in Alaska tells me that the only way to deal with this is, on an early spring night, you get pissed drunk and walk naked outside for the mosquitoes to feast. You'd look like smallpox had been training in a montage for 40 years just to come crashing down on you alone. You'd seem like the Michelin Man lived to be 120 and tried to relive the glory days with a bike pump. You'd get sucked dry like a Capri Sun bag, and your pouch will not be respected. But Godspeed, good friend. I hope you have enough whiskey to drown out those titanic taint tingles. Woo! Turning away from my friend's ball sack to our maps, most world builders are happy to put a simple band of tundra around their northern and southern continents at about 66 degrees latitude and call it a day, and that's perfectly acceptable to do. But in real life, tundras often stretch further downwards, running along mountain ridges like Alpine Tundras, or they can even sit below areas of lush taiga forest, like happens in Alaska. The stretching down of a tundra below that band can be caused by large land masses or cold ocean water, which can both make a place cold and dry. If you don't care about the specifics and reasoning behind this all, go down below and skip to where I give a shorthand after this. Russia is f***ing huge, and it sees more tundra and very cold subarctic conditions in its east than its west. This is for two main reasons. One, Asia is a massive, blocky landmass. Its inland is so far from the ocean that there's a lot less evaporation and moisture in the air here. A key point here is that dry air is denser, colder, and higher pressure than warm, wet air, and tundras form where it's cold and dry. Siberia and Central Asia end up having this bubble of cold, dry weather because there's so little evaporation here, especially in the wintertime. This big block of cold, dry air that sticks around causes a lot of the deserts in Central Asia, as well as the tundras of Siberia. Siberia is also colder than Western Russia because Western Russia is affected by the warm waters around Europe. The warm, wet air from these ocean currents is pushed by eastward winds into the European portion of Russia. Over this vast landmass, though, these winds lose their moisture and their warmth. So by the time they're in the east, the wind is really dry and cold. Siberia also gets oceanic winds from the north, which is a super cold, high-pressure zone from the Arctic, so that doesn't help warm it up at all. So, in placing these tundras, we're focusing on land masses and ocean currents. These things also give Alaska a weird biome profile. The southern coast is a more temperate oceanic environment, the middle is a cold taiga, while the western outjut and northern section are both tundras. This is strange, especially that cold, dry western coast. So, this is because a relatively warm Pacific current travels eastward at about northern California's latitude. Then it splits and it goes up the coast and creates a gyre south of Alaska, basically a big spinny water current. Some water here goes more north through the Aleutian Islands and forms another gyre in the Bering Sea. Then it goes more north up into the Arctic Ocean. When water forms a gyre up in the north like this, it releases its warmth and moisture as it takes time to spin around. That's why the southern coast is decently warm and humid. The water is spending time here and making the weather warmer and wetter. The water that goes into the Bering Sea then is colder, and this affects the weather of western Alaska, turning it into a tundra. If this Alaskan peninsula didn't exist, I don't think it would form a gyre and the water would flow straight up into the Bering Sea. So I bet the southern and western coast would both be a taiga, just like those latitudes are in Canada. If you want to do the winds and currents of your world's land masses in depth on your own, here is an Artifexian video on it, but I'll give you a shorthand here. This list covers it for the northern hemisphere. First, anything in the highest latitudes of the hemisphere should be a tundra. If it's on a massive landmass, make the tundra take up more area, especially on the eastern portion of it. If there's a waterway from the Arctic down to the temperate oceans, the land on the waterway's left will be very cold. Now the land on the waterway's right. If a current from the southwest could come up and hit that coast unobstructed by land, it'll be warmer. It'll look more like Iceland, Scotland, or Juneau, Alaska. If not, it'll be a tundra. If there is a big island with currents connecting the Arctic and temperate oceans on both sides of it, that land will be super cold, like Greenland. Now, if you're making something in the southern hemisphere, the directions are flipped. So the land to the right of the waterways is cold, and the land on the other side with an unobstructed current from the northeast is warmer. And for both hemispheres, if there are high mountains, there will be alpine tundra along those high ridges. Tundra can even form in the tropics if these mountains are high enough. Peep this Tibetan plateau with permafrost on it. This cold, bald, windy patches on the top of mountains are called Alpine Tundras. As you go up a mountain, it gets colder and the air gets windier and thinner. Climbing up is kind of like walking north, as you hit deciduous forest, then mixed, then evergreen, then you pass the tree line, where now you're in an alpine tundra. Why do we refer to the Alps in the biome name? I don't know, Europe just likes to think it's the entire world. The higher north the mountains are, the lower the elevation of the tree line and the lower the Alpine Tundra starts. There's this fascinating thing that happens at the tree line when the conditions become too harsh and windy for trees to live. It's called a Krummholz. The winds blow on the trees so hard that they can't grow naturally unless it's protected by a rock or a ridge or something. Krummholz trees can form like flags, where the trunk itself protects the branches so they only grow on the windless side, or the trees can grow to be gnarly and knotted, where stuff is pushed over, twisty, and grows deformed so as to create a larger space of protection for its branches. I would love for there to be a D&D boss fight on a giant gnarled tree like this, where the boss can change the direction of the wind and absolutely fuck the party over if he hits the branches. Holding on would be like a dex and a strength check. If you can continue further up past the tundra zone, you'll eventually reach the snow line, where snow and ice stay year-round. If the ridge is big enough, glaciers will form. This highest line on the mountains has the same features as a polar desert. Polar deserts are completely desolate landscapes of glaciers, rock, and snow. Think the top of Mount Everest, the South Pole, or Greenland. Any life that exists here relies on aquatic hunting, like seals, penguins, walruses, and polar bears do. So you won't get many of these on a glacial zone at the top of a mountain. Of course, unless you world build it, you could figure that out. This desolate area may seem boring, but you can get interesting features to world build with, like glacial crevices, cliffs, boulders, jagged spires, avalanches, subglacial lakes, tunnels, rivers, and more. Just take a look at this footage of people crossing glaciers on Mount Everest and add a big dong dude hurling boulders at them, and there's your next D&D glacial encounter. If you want to go more in depth about glaciers and ice ages, these two videos will help you out a lot, as they talk about glacial landforms, mountain glaciers, and floods. On your maps, though, it's only vital that you know that in the northern tundras where glaciers used to be, you'll have large areas of lakes scraped out by their movement. See Canada, Finland, or, again, these videos for more detail. Now, world building a settled human civilization for the tundra is not as simple as making one for forests or shrublands. Tundras have a lot of harshnesses to overcome, but by God, we've still done it. Let's take a look at 3 examples of real tundra peoples,
And then we'll discuss some Arctic-based cultural beliefs, religious ideas, and traditions.
The Nenets, Inuits, and Scandinavians are all far northerners, but they have different ways of going about food, shelter, and transportation. The Nenets are peoples who live in the northwest and north-central regions of Russia. The Inuits are a group of Native American peoples stretching from Alaska to Greenland, and the Scandinavians settled from Canada to Eastern Europe. All 3 of these people groups had populations living in the tundra. Those tundra sectors would always rely on fishing and hunting for food and export goods. The Inuits are the most hardcore tundra peoples. They pretty much exclusively hunted and gathered, and they'd make their clothes, teepees, and kayaks out of reindeer and seal skins. Many Inuit peoples lived deep into the tundra, so they'd have to use bones, walrus ivory, teeth, and driftwood for their tools and crafts. They were expert navigators in this region and would rely on landmarks, cairns they'd set up, and these cool wooden maps depicting coastlines. Other than that, the Inuits are famous for setting up igloos, which are temporary houses that insulate themselves well when you light a fire in the middle. You must have some pretty cold balls in order to go up to a seal and smack it with a club or stab it with a spear, 'cause look at this thing. The Nenets lived in the taiga and tundra, though after recent Soviet brutalization, most traditional Nenets today live in the Russian tundra. Around the 1700s, people groups here began domesticating reindeer in large herds. Since Nenets relied on reindeer meat for food, skins for clothing and teepees, antlers and organs for tools and trade, and labor for pulling sleds, a major economic activity of the tundra Nenets was reindeer pastoralism on the tundra shrub. Of course, this was additional to hunting and fishing, but all these activities require you to move around as a nomadic clan. A fun fact that comes from this: each Nenets clan carries with it a sacred sled pulled by dogs that only the elders can unpack. This would have things like bear skins, precious metals, and religious symbols, seemingly all stuff that has a material air of power. And finally, we get the Scandinavians. Scandinavia is actually quite a diverse area, but it's mostly forests, mountains, sea, lakes, swamp, and tundra. While farming and herding were the main economic activities for the people, the Scandinavians still heavily relied on the ocean for fish, travel, and trade. I mean, the region is surrounded by water and islands with a bunch of different peoples on the far shores, so it makes sense that they're gonna get really good at shipbuilding and sailing because of their geography. I think this is best shown in the mountainous northern coast of Norway. The fjord valleys here saw groups of families settle around them because they were often surrounded by fertile lands and had deep inlets that were perfect for shipbuilding and harbors. So when the Viking expansion started, many came from this northern coastal area. Right now, the most accepted theory as to why the Vikings started raiding is because there weren't that many women in the homeland, as a consequence of selective female infanticide. So young men would go together to increase their prospects of wealth and marriage, by looting places, selling people into slavery, and eventually conquering whole regions. Once one person goes and loots a monastery without any trouble and comes back with a bunch of gold, you're gonna get a lot more raiders trying to follow in those riches and glory. Scandinavians also famously settled Greenland and Iceland, the latter of which edges the difference between tundra and subarctic plain. Look at this. Every Köppen climate map of Iceland claims it to be something different. Bullshit. Iceland has a warm climate for being this far north, because it's blasted by the warm Gulf Stream, and it's got volcanic hot springs, which is a pretty good resource up here. The Icelanders largely relied on pastoralism of traditional farm animals, hunting, as well as fishing and sea travel, of course. This was a particularly lush Arctic landscape, where people would settle in the fertile coastal lowlands and in the fjords. The inland would be used for grazing. Greenland is a different story. Eric the Red famously explored the island and named it Greenland to trick people into moving there. Where the tundras of Iceland and Scandinavia were close by to milder forests, vegetation in Greenland was sparse at best. Here, they'd just hunt and fish, and we have records of them traveling halfway up the island on expeditions to hunt walruses and polar bears. Of course, though, the Scandinavian settlements on South Greenland eventually failed, probably due to overgrazing and deforestation of the sparse foliage there. Meanwhile, the mega Chad Inuits were literally chilling at the northern end of Greenland, just in their everyday vibe, watching the Aurora Borealis. Aurora? My accent and speech impediment do not like that word. Basically, charged solar particles get deflected off the Earth's magnetosphere and sent to the poles, where they clash with the charged part of the upper atmosphere, and it goes If you are world building an Arctic civilization and you don't include the Aurora in its religion, I'll charge the particles on your face! The Inuits told that the lights were ancestor spirits playing a ball game with a cosmic walrus skull. Norse mythology claims that the Aurora was the reflection of the armor and shields of the Valkyries, women warriors who decided who would die in battle. It was also seen as the Bifrost, the rainbow energy bridge that brought killed warriors to Valhalla. Finnish mythology sees the lights as the trail kicked up by cosmic firefoxes. All of these stories are tripping, but I like Finland's interpretation the best. The Finns also have traditions surrounding the midnight sun. On the summer solstice, the Earth's axial tilt is more pointed at the sun, so there's this fully illuminated circle at the very top. As the Earth rotates here, the sun hits even the far side of it because it's tilted. That's why the sun doesn't set for a long time during midsummer up here. The same goes for winter, but it's just really dark and scary. The Finnish midsummer holiday is called Johannes, named after the Christian prophet John the Baptist. It was originally called Ukon Juhla, named after the Finnish god of weather, harvest, and thunder, Ukko. Being that it's a long day in the middle of summer, the celebration of this includes big bonfires. It was also believed that magic rituals were more powerful at this time, especially those involving young women trying to find love and fertile humps. This day is generally for drinking and outdoor partying, and nowadays many Finns go on vacation to northern summer cabins. As you can see, tundras aren't just boring mosses. They're filled with all sorts of variety, resources, and dangers. There's a certain magic in the fog, abyss to the swamps, and mystique within the ice. If you want to see some fun world building about Arctic minotaurs, I'm gonna publish that separately, because this has already been an episode of the World Building TV show, 20 minutes long. I'm Stoneworks Jack. If you liked this video, please like, comment, dislike, unsubscribe, whatever. and I'll see you guys later. These patrons: Rift Ranger, Shadow 11, Buddha, Kenny Vetter, Grape Juice Horror, Kowit, Travis, Ben McFarland, Squid Exorcist, and William Price. Y'all are dope. I'm gonna put this out early for y'all. Thank you guys so much. Have a good one.